I'm Clara, 28 female. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the city, a place I've curated with thrift store furniture and walls of my own graphic design prints. My life has always been about finding beauty in the overlooked, about structure and quiet diligence. It was a life I was content with, one that I had built for myself far from the noise of my family. But a single, cold object, dropped into the bottom of my purse, was about to shatter that peace and force me to redesign my entire world from the ashes of betrayal. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In every family, there are roles. I was the planner, the reliable one, the one you called when you needed a spreadsheet to organize a holiday, a sober driver at 2 a.m., or just someone to listen without judgment. My sister, Chloe, was the star. 3 years my junior, she was a supernova of charisma, a social media influencer whose life was a meticulously curated feed of brunch spots, sponsored outfits, and effortless glamour. My parents, David and Susan, were the audience. They watched Chloe's dazzling performance with unwavering adoration, their applause echoing in every decision they made, every comparison they drew. Our family portrait was one of serene suburban success, but if you looked closely, you could see the cracks in the canvas. My father, an accountant, valued stability and predictability, qualities I embodied. Yet he was utterly captivated by Chloe's unpredictable sparkle. My mother, a retired teacher, preached fairness and equality but saved her warmest smiles and proudest anecdotes for her younger daughter. I wasn't unloved, not exactly. I was maintained. I was a foundational element, the sturdy, unadorned frame holding up the vibrant, ever-changing masterpiece that was Chloe. The tension that had simmered for 2 decades was about to boil over, all because of our grandmother's necklace. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a legacy. A delicate white gold chain holding a sapphire the color of a deep twilight sky, surrounded by a halo of tiny, brilliant diamonds. It was our grandmother's most prized possession, and in her will, she left it to be shared between us, with a note specifying it was to be given to the first daughter to be married. Since neither of us was close to marriage, my mother kept it in a velvet-lined box in their home safe, bringing it out only for the most significant family occasions. The occasion on the horizon was my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. My mother, in a rare moment of inclusive planning, had decided on a grand party at a local upscale restaurant. It was my job, naturally, to coordinate with the venue, design the invitations, and track the RSVPs. Chloe's job was to be the effervescent host, charming the guests and making sure the social media posts about the event were tagged appropriately. A week before the party, we were at my parents' house for our customary Sunday dinner. My mother was flitting around the kitchen, humming with excitement. "I was thinking," she said, pausing with a serving spoon in her hand, "that one of you girls should wear Grandma's necklace to the party. It would be a wonderful way to have her with us in spirit." My heart gave a hopeful little flutter. I had always adored the necklace. Its classic, understated elegance felt like a kindred spirit. Chloe, on the other hand, preferred loud, trendy statement pieces. "Oh, that's a beautiful idea, Mom," I said, picturing the sapphire against the simple navy dress I had already picked out. Chloe, who had been scrolling silently through her phone, looked up, her expression unreadable. "Sure," she said with a shrug. "Whoever's outfit it matches best, I guess." Later, while I was helping my mother clear the table, she pulled me aside. "I think you should wear it, Clara," she whispered, her voice conspiratorial. "Chloe has so many of her own flashy things. This is, well, it's more you." I felt a bloom of warmth in my chest. It was a small thing, but it felt like a validation I hadn't realized I was starving for. A recognition that my quiet style had its own value. "Really? Thank you, Mom. That means a lot." She squeezed my arm. "Of course, dear. We'll get it out of the safe on the day of the party." For the next week, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It was foolish, I knew, to place so much importance on a piece of jewelry, but it felt symbolic. It was a chance to wear a piece of our family's history, to feel connected to my grandmother, and to feel, just for a night, a little bit like the chosen one. The day of the party arrived. I spent the afternoon getting ready, taking extra care with my hair and makeup. When I slipped on my navy dress, I felt a quiet confidence. I drove to my parents' house, my purse on the passenger seat, feeling a nervous excitement. I was supposed to get there early to help with some last-minute details before we all headed to the restaurant. I walked in to find Chloe already there, looking impossibly chic in a glittering, champagne-colored dress. She was in the living room with my mother, a glass of Prosecco already in her hand. "There you are," my mother said, her smile a little tight. "We were just waiting for you." "Sorry, traffic was a bit slow," I said, placing my purse on the entryway table. "I'm ready to help with whatever you need." "Actually," Chloe said, taking a deliberate sip of her drink, "there's a bit of a problem." My mother wrung her hands. "We went to get the necklace out of the safe, honey, and, well, the box is empty." The air went out of the room. "What, empty? Are you sure?" I asked, my mind racing. "Did you look everywhere? Maybe it fell out." "We've torn the study apart," my father said, walking in from the hallway, his face grim. "It's gone." Chloe let out a theatrical sigh, placing her hand on her chest. "I just can't imagine who would do something like that. It's been in that safe for years. The only people with the combination are the four of us." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My father looked from me to Chloe, his brow furrowed. My mother just looked lost, her eyes darting between her daughters. "I was the last one to see it," Chloe added, her voice soft and full of faux concern. "Mom and I looked at it a few weeks ago, remember, Mom? Just to admire it." My mother nodded numbly. "Well, I haven't seen it in over a year," I said, my voice defensive. "I wouldn't even know where to begin to look." Chloe took another sip of her drink. "It's just so strange, for it to disappear right before the party where Clara was supposed to wear it." She didn't look at me, but I felt her words like a physical blow. The beautiful image I had of the evening, of feeling special and seen, began to crumble. The perfect family portrait was developing a dark, ugly stain, and I was right in the center of it. The setup was complete, I just didn't know how deep the trap was yet. The atmosphere in the house grew heavy, charged with suspicion. The celebratory air had evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of my mother's frantic, fruitless searching and my father's stony silence. He kept pacing the length of the living room, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking towards me every few moments with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't overt accusation, not yet, but it was a cold, calculating assessment that made my skin crawl. "This is ridiculous," I finally said, my voice trembling slightly. "We have to think logically. Who else has been in the house?" "Only the weekly cleaning lady," my mother murmured, sinking onto the sofa. "But she's been with us for 10 years. She's like family." "People change, Mom," Chloe said pointedly. She walked over to our mother and put a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Especially when they're desperate." The word desperate hung in the air, aimed directly at me. It was true that my freelance graphic design work had its ups and downs. I didn't live the lavish, sponsored lifestyle Chloe did. I had student loans. I drove a 10-year-old car. In the narrative Chloe was weaving, I had the motive. I felt a surge of hot anger. "What are you trying to say, Chloe?" She pulled back, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Nothing. I'm just saying we should consider all the possibilities. We need to call the police, for insurance purposes if nothing else." My father stopped pacing and nodded. "She's right. A report needs to be filed." My stomach twisted into a knot. The police? This was a family matter, a misunderstanding. Bringing in law enforcement felt like a massive, irreversible escalation. "Wait, can't we just talk about this? Maybe we're overlooking something simple." "What's there to talk about, Clara?" Chloe's voice had a sharp edge now. "A priceless family heirloom is gone. Stolen. I think that warrants a phone call, don't you?" Before I could argue further, she had her phone out and was dialing. My parents just watched, seemingly paralyzed by the situation. As Chloe spoke to the dispatcher in a calm, controlled voice detailing the theft of a valuable antique, I felt a profound sense of unreality. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be my family. Two police officers arrived less than 20 minutes later. They were professional but stern, their presence making our familiar living room feel like a crime scene. I watched, numb, as they took statements from my parents and Chloe. Chloe was the star of the show, of course. She recounted the story with heartbreaking detail, her voice cracking at just the right moments as she described the sentimental value of her beloved grandmother's necklace. She masterfully painted a picture of a close-knit family torn apart by a sudden, inexplicable crime. When they turned to me, I could only state the simple truth. I haven't seen the necklace in over a year. I came here straight from my apartment this evening. I was looking forward to wearing it. One of the officers, a woman with tired eyes, wrote in her notepad, "And you live alone, Ms. Evans?" "Yes," I said. "Anyone visit your apartment today?" "No." The questions continued, each one making me feel smaller and more guilty, despite my innocence. Then came the moment that would define the rest of my life. Chloe, who had been watching with a pained expression, stepped forward. "Officer," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I hate to even suggest this. It feels awful, but for this to happen inside the house, it has to be one of us. Maybe we should just clear the air." The male officer raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting, miss?" "I'm just saying," she continued, now dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, "to rule everything out so we can start looking at external possibilities. Maybe we should volunteer to let you look through our things, our purses, our coats. I'll go first, I have nothing to hide." It was a brilliant move, a devastatingly cruel, brilliant move. She made it sound like a noble act of transparency, a way to help the investigation. My mother nodded eagerly, desperate for a solution. "Yes, of course, anything to help." Chloe immediately opened her designer handbag, letting the officers peer inside. My mother offered up her own purse from the kitchen counter. My father showed them he only had his wallet and keys. Then all eyes turned to me. My simple leather purse was still sitting on the entryway table where I'd left it. "Clara," the officer asked, his voice neutral. My blood ran cold. It felt like a trap, but what could I do? Refusing would be an admission of guilt. "Of course," I managed to say, my throat dry. I walked over to the table, my legs feeling like lead. I picked up my purse and brought it to the coffee table. My hands were shaking as I unzipped the main compartment. The officer shone his flashlight inside. He pushed aside my wallet, my small sketchbook, my pen case. And then he stopped. Slowly, he reached in and pulled out a delicate, glittering chain. Dangling from his fingers, catching the light of the lamp, was Grandma's sapphire necklace. A collective gasp filled the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled sob escaping. My father stared, his face a mask of pure, undiluted disappointment. But the most horrifying sight was Chloe. She wasn't looking at the necklace. She was looking at me, and in her eyes, for a split second before she replaced it with a look of shattered betrayal, I saw a flash of triumphant, venomous victory. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not possible. I don't know how that got there." My words were meaningless, lost in the damning silence. The evidence was right there, sparkling cruelly in the officer's hand. "Clara, how could you?" My father's voice was low and dangerous. "I did, I swear I did." I looked at my mother, pleading with my eyes. "Mom, you have to believe me. Chloe." "Chloe what?" my mother cried, turning on me. "Chloe has been here with us. You just walked in. How could you do this to us, to your grandmother's memory, after everything we've done for you?" Each word was a physical blow. The presumption of my guilt was immediate and absolute. There was no question, no doubt, no benefit of the doubt for the reliable daughter. The female officer spoke softly, but her words were firm. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us down to the station." The rest of the evening was a blur of humiliation. Being led out of my own parents' house, the quiet shame of being put in the back of a police car, the cold, sterile environment of the police station. They questioned me for hours, but my story never changed because it was the truth. I didn't know how the necklace got in my purse. I had been set up. They finally released me in the early hours of the morning, citing the need for further investigation. My parents had decided not to press charges immediately, a fact the officer delivered as if it were an act of profound mercy. I walked out into the cold night air, alone. I called for a taxi, my hands still shaking. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Chloe. The family portrait was not just stained, it was shredded. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my own sister was the one holding the knife. The days that followed were a special kind of hell, a silent, isolating punishment. My parents didn't call. When I tried calling them, my father's responses were clipped and cold, while my mother would just cry and say she couldn't talk about it right now. They had already tried and convicted me in the court of their own opinion. The lack of formal charges felt less like mercy and more like a strategic move to avoid a public family scandal. They could handle the situation internally by simply cutting me out. I was an island of grief in my small apartment. Sleep offered no escape, replaying that moment of discovery, the cold weight of the necklace, the look of triumph in Chloe's eyes, my mother's horrified gasp. I couldn't work. My creativity, the very core of my profession, was smothered by a thick blanket of despair and rage. How could they believe her so easily? 28 years of being the dependable, responsible daughter, erased in a single, glittering instant. My one lifeline was Mark. He was my best friend from college, a web developer with a mind as logical as it was compassionate. He showed up at my door the day after my release with 2 large pizzas and a 6-pack of craft beer. He didn't press for details. He just sat with me on my couch as I stared blankly at the wall, letting the silence be a comfort instead of a threat. Finally, after an hour, I told him everything. I poured out the whole sordid story, my voice a mixture of fury and heartbreak. He listened without interruption, his expression growing more and more serious. When I finished, he didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say, "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." He just nodded slowly and said, "Okay, so she planted it. The question is if, but how, and more importantly, why." "The why is easy," I said bitterly. "She couldn't stand that Mom wanted me to wear it. She has to be the center of attention always. If she couldn't have it, she had to make sure I couldn't either, and she had to destroy me in the process. And framing you for felony theft is a pretty surefire way to do that," Mark said grimly. "But proving it is the hard part. Your word against hers, and your parents have already picked a side." He was right. A simple accusation would get me nowhere. It would sound like a desperate, pathetic attempt to deflect blame. I needed proof. Cold, hard, undeniable proof that would force my parents to see the truth. "But where do I even start?" I asked, feeling a fresh wave of hopelessness. "She's so careful, so curated. Her entire life is a performance. There won't be a single crack in her story." Mark leaned forward, his expression intent. "Everyone makes mistakes, Clara, especially arrogant people. They get sloppy. Chloe's entire world is online. Her performance, as you call it, is documented 24/7. So let's start there. Let's go through her digital life with a fine-tooth comb." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was a tiny spark of purpose. He was right. Chloe lived and breathed for her online persona. If she had been planning something this elaborate, there had to be a digital footprint, no matter how small. We spent the rest of the evening and all of the next day hunched over Mark's laptop, turning my living room into an impromptu command center. We dissected Chloe's social media accounts, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. We scrolled back months, then years. It was a nauseating journey through a life of manufactured perfection. Countless photos of her laughing with friends at rooftop bars, posing with gifted products, and vacationing in exotic locales, all paid for by brand deals and, I suspected, our parents' generosity. We looked at every post, every story highlight, every tagged photo. We read the comments, looking for names of friends or places that seemed out of the ordinary. It was exhausting, painstaking work. Most of it was useless, a digital mountain of meaningless fluff. "This is hopeless," I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes late on the second night. There's nothing here, just endless pictures of avocado toast and designer shoes. Wait, Mark said, his voice quiet but sharp. He pointed to the screen. Look at this. It was an Instagram post from about 4 months ago. A carousel of photos of Chloe and a friend of hers, another influencer named Jessica, on a spontaneous weekend shopping spree. The first few photos were predictable, them holding up shopping bags, trying on clothes. But the last photo was a selfie of them inside a store I didn't recognize. The background was blurred, but you could make out glass display cases filled with jewelry. The caption was generic. A little sparkle never hurt nobody. Sparkle's shopping spree besties. So she was at a jewelry store, I said, shrugging. That doesn't prove anything. Maybe not, Mark said, zooming in on the photo. The quality degraded, but you could just make out a partial logo on the wall behind them. A stylized A and J, but look at the comments. We scrolled down. Most were fawning compliments from her followers. But then we saw one from Jessica, the friend in the photo. It read, "OMG, that replica was insane. They could make an exact copy." Shushing face. My breath caught in my throat. I read it again. Replica, exact copy. Chloe's reply was underneath it, posted moments later. At Jessica Styles SHHH, don't give away all my secrets. Winking face. My heart started pounding in my chest. It was thin, so incredibly thin. But it was. Something, it was a glimmer. A replica, I whispered, looking at Mark. His eyes were wide. What if she didn't just steal the necklace, Clara? He said, the pieces clicking into place. What if she replaced it? Or what if she had a fake made to plant in your purse, and she sold the real one? The audacity of it was staggering. It was so much more complex and diabolical than a simple act of jealous rage. This was premeditated. It was a cold, calculated plot designed not just to hurt me, but to profit. The logo, I said, my voice urgent. And Jay, we have to find that store. Mark was already typing furiously. He started searching for jewelry stores in the high-end shopping district Chloe frequented. He cross-referenced them with logos. After a few minutes of intense searching, he found it. Aurelian Jewelry, he said, turning the laptop towards me, specializing in custom designs and estate replicas. The address was less than 5 miles from my apartment. I stared at the screen, at the innocent-looking photo and the 2 seemingly harmless comments buried in a sea of digital noise. It was a tiny crack in Chloe's perfect facade. It wasn't proof yet, not even close. But it was a thread. And I knew, with a surge of adrenaline and righteous fury, that I was going to pull on that thread until her entire web of lies unraveled. The digital dust had just given me my first clue, and my investigation had just begun. The discovery of the Instagram comment lit a fire under me. The crushing weight of despair was replaced by a sharp, focused anger. Mark and I spent the rest of the night strategizing. A social media comment wasn't enough to confront my family with, and it certainly wasn't legal proof. It would be dismissed as a joke, a misunderstanding. I needed to connect that comment to the actual necklace. I needed to go to Aurelian Jewelry. The next morning, I dressed carefully. I couldn't look like a woman whose life had just been upended. I needed to look poised, professional, and confident. I chose a tailored blazer and styled my hair neatly. I was a graphic designer, after all. Presentation was part of my skill set. I was about to give the performance of my life. Mark offered to come with me, but I knew I had to do this alone. Bringing a friend would seem suspicious. I needed to be a casual, prospective customer. Aurelian Jewelry was exactly the kind of place Chloe would love. Sleek, minimalist, and intimidatingly expensive. Soft music played as I stepped inside, the scent of subtle perfume hanging in the air. A well-dressed man in his late 50s with kind eyes and a professional smile approached me from behind a glass counter. "Good morning, how may I help you?" he asked. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I forced a calm, pleasant smile. "Good morning. I'm hoping you can help me with something a bit unusual. I'm looking to get a piece of family jewelry appraised and possibly replicated for my sister." A friend of a friend recommended your store for its expertise in estate replicas. I was laying the groundwork, making the topic of replicas seem like my idea. We'd be happy to assist, he said, gesturing to a small, private seating area. My name is Arthur. Do you have the piece with you? Unfortunately, no, I said, taking a seat. This was the tricky part. It's a family heirloom, and my mother is very protective of it, but I do have very detailed photographs. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd found in my mother's digital albums from a few years ago. It was a high-resolution shot of the necklace, displayed on a velvet bust for insurance purposes. The detail was impeccable. You could see every facet of the sapphire, every tiny prong holding the diamonds. Arthur took my phone and studied the image, his professional eye taking in every detail. Exquisite, he murmured. A natural cornflower sapphire, likely of Sri Lankan origin from the look of it. The setting appears to be early 20th century, a beautiful piece. Thank you, I said, my voice steady despite my nerves. My sister has always loved it, and I wanted to surprise her with a replica for her upcoming birthday. Something she could wear without worrying about losing the original. He nodded, understanding. A very common request. We could certainly create a near-identical piece. We would use a high-quality, lab-created sapphire and simulants for the diamonds. To the naked eye, it would be indistinguishable. Now for the leap. I had to connect this conversation to Chloe. I pretended to scroll through my phone, then feigned a moment of realization. You know, it's funny, I think my sister might have actually been in here before. Her name is Chloe Evans. She's a social media influencer, very into fashion. I gave a little self-deprecating laugh. She might have come in to ask about this very necklace. She can be rather impulsive. Arthur's polite smile didn't change, but I saw a flicker of recognition in his eye. Ease, he handed my phone back. The name does sound familiar. We have many clients. Let me check our system for you. Sometimes we keep notes on inquiries. He walked over to a computer terminal behind the counter. My breath was lodged in my throat. This was it. The entire thing hinged on this moment, on whether he had a record, on whether he was willing to share it. I watched him type, his face impassive. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Finally, he turned back to me. His expression was still professionally neutral, but his tone had shifted slightly. Yes, I remember now. A young woman was in about 4 months ago, Chloe Evans. She showed me the very same photograph. I fought to keep my expression placid, to hide the violent surge of vindication that shot through me. Oh, really? I knew it. What did she say? Arthur hesitated for a moment, a professional debating how much information to disclose. I held his gaze, trying to project an aura of sincerity and harmlessness. She was interested in a quote for a replica, he said carefully. She was also interested in the potential resale value of the original. The room seemed to tilt, so it wasn't just about framing me, it was about money. Mark had been right. Resale value? I asked, feigning surprise. Wow, I hope she's not thinking of selling it. It has such sentimental value. Indeed, Arthur said. I provided her with a quote for a top-tier replica using the best simulants, and I gave her a rough verbal appraisal for the original based on the photograph. I advised her that a physical inspection would be needed for a formal valuation, of course. This was more than I could have hoped for. Would it be possible to get a copy of that quote for the replica? Since I'm thinking of commissioning it anyway, it would save some time. He considered this. Normally, quotes are specific to the client, but since it's for your sister, yes, I suppose that would be all right. It might help you with your birthday gift decision. He turned back to his computer, printed a document, and slid it into a tasteful branded folder. He handed it to me. Here you are. This details the materials, craftsmanship, and cost for the replica she inquired about. I took the folder, my hand trembling slightly. Thank you so much, Arthur. You've been incredibly helpful. I walked out of the store and didn't let myself breathe until I was back in my car. I tore open the folder. There it was, on official Aurelian jewelry letterhead. A detailed quote for one custom replica necklace, matching the specifications of the Evans family heirloom made out to Chloe Evans. The date on the quote was 4 months ago. This was my proof. This was the evidence of premeditation. This showed that she had been planning to create a fake long before the party. But Arthur's other comment about the resale value had opened up a new, darker dimension to her betrayal. It wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was about greed. I called Mark immediately, my voice shaking with a mixture of excitement and fury. She did it. I have the proof. She got a quote for a replica 4 months ago. That's amazing, Clara, he said. But what about the original? Where is it? That's the next step, I said, my mind racing. She didn't just want a fake to plant on me. She wanted to sell the real one. I need to find out where it went. Chloe thought she had woven the perfect web of lies, with me caught helplessly in the center. But she'd been sloppy. She'd left a trail, and now I had a map. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to expose every single thing she had done. The investigation was far from over, but for the first time, I knew I was no longer the prey. I was the hunter. Armed with the jeweler's quote, I felt a seismic shift in my own confidence. The document in my hands was more than just paper. It was a weapon. It was the first piece of undeniable truth in a sea of lies, but I knew it wasn't enough. Presenting this alone would result in a shouting match. Chloe would deny it, call the jeweler a liar, and my parents, desperate to maintain their curated reality, might just believe her. I had to build an ironclad case, one so strong that no amount of tears or histrionics from Chloe could dismantle it. The new question burned in my mind: where was the real necklace? If Chloe had it replicated, it was almost certain she had sold the original. An influencer lifestyle like hers, full of designer clothes and expensive dinners, wasn't cheap. I suspected her online success didn't translate into as much real-world income as she pretended. This is where Mark's expertise became indispensable. If she sold something that valuable, she wouldn't have done it for cash on the street. He explained as we sat in my apartment, the quote lying on the coffee table between us like a sacred text. She'd want to maximize her profit. She would have used a reputable online consignment store for luxury goods, so knew her she could get it, authenticated to fetch the highest price. He pulled his laptop over. Let's think like Chloe. She's image conscious. She'd use a site that's well known with glossy branding, somewhere her influencer friends might use. We compiled a list of the top luxury resale websites. For hours, we scoured their archives, using search terms like sapphire diamond necklace, vintage white gold, and heirloom jewelry. It was like looking for a needle in a digital haystack. There were thousands of listings. Just as my eyes were starting to glaze over, Mark let out a low whistle. "Clara, get over here." He was on a site called The Gilded Collection. He pointed to a listing marked sold. The pictures were professional, taken against a stark white background, but there was no mistaking it. It was Grandma's necklace. I would know it anywhere. The specific cut of the sapphire, the delicate arrangement of the diamonds, and, most tellingly, a tiny, unique flaw in one of the links of the chain near the clasp that I remembered from seeing it as a child. The listing described it as an exquisite Art Deco sapphire and diamond pendant, authenticated by their in-house gemologists. The sale price made my stomach clench, $22,000. "She sold it for $22,000, I whispered, horrified and astounded in equal measure. All this pain, all this destruction for a payday. The listing had been posted 3 months ago, a month after she'd gotten the quote for the replica. The timeline was perfect. The sale had been finalized 2 months ago. The money was likely long gone. "The seller is anonymous, of course," Mark said, scrolling through the page. "But these sites have to comply with financial regulations. They'll have a record of who they paid that money to. We can't get that legally without a subpoena, but maybe we don't need to." "What do you mean?" "Chloe is smart, but she's also lazy when it comes to details she finds boring, like digital security," he said. "She probably uses the same email and bank account for everything. The question is, how do we find out where the money went without tipping her off? The answer, I realized, was my father. As the family accountant, my dad had, for years, helped both of us with our taxes. He insisted on it, saying it was the only way to ensure we were being responsible. I knew for a fact that he had access to Chloe's primary bank account statements through a shared online portal he'd set up for her when she first started earning money as an influencer. He saw it as his fatherly duty to keep an eye on her finances. It was an intrusion I had always hated, but now it was a godsend. The problem was, I couldn't just ask him. He was barely speaking to me. I had to orchestrate a situation where I could get access myself. My plan began to form, piece by painful piece. It wasn't enough to just expose Chloe. I had to do it in a way that was theatrical, undeniable, and utterly devastating. She had chosen a public stage for my humiliation, our parents' anniversary party. I would choose one for her downfall. Thanksgiving was in 3 weeks. I knew my parents, guided by their desire for a perfect family image, would eventually try to force a reconciliation. They would extend a reluctant, guilt-ridden invitation for me to join them for the holiday, all in the name of moving on. This would be my stage. First, I needed those bank statements. I waited a week, letting the silence from my family fester. Then, I sent a carefully worded email to my father. I didn't mention the necklace. I kept it professional and distant. I wrote that I was applying for a small business loan to expand my graphic design work and needed copies of my last 2 years of tax returns, which I knew he kept on the family's shared cloud drive. It was a plausible request that played into my role as the responsible daughter. As I'd hoped, he replied curtly a day later with the login information for the drive. "The files are in the financials folder," he wrote. "Let me know when you have them so I can change the password." I logged in immediately, and there it was, not just my folder but Chloe S2 unlocked and accessible. My father's obsession with organization was his undoing. I quickly navigated to her bank statements, and I found it, a deposit from 2 months ago, a wire transfer from TGC Processing, the parent company of the Gilded Collection. The amount, $21,150, the sale price minus their commission. I downloaded the statement. I downloaded the listing from the consignment site with its high-resolution photos and sale price. I printed the quote from Aurelian Jewelry. I arranged them all in a neat, professional-looking file folder. My case was complete. I had the motive, debt, and greed, the means, the replica, and the proof of the crime, the sale, and the deposit. Now, all I had to do was wait for my invitation to the final act. It came, as predicted. A week before Thanksgiving, a stilted phone call from my mother. "Clara," she began, her voice heavy with forced cheerfulness, "we were hoping you would join us for Thanksgiving dinner. It's time for our family to heal." "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Mom," I said, my voice cold. "Please, Clara, for me, we can't go on like this. Chloe misses you too. She feels terrible about how all this has played out." The lie was so blatant it was almost laughable. She feels terrible. "Okay," I said, letting a note of weary resignation enter my tone. "I'll be there." I could hear the relief in her sigh. She thought I was coming back to the fold, ready to forgive and forget. She had no idea I was coming for justice. I hung up the phone and looked at the file folder on my desk. The stage was set. The evidence was gathered. All the actors were in place. Chloe was about to discover what it felt like to have her perfect, curated world burn to the ground. Thanksgiving Day felt surreal. The air was crisp and cold as I drove to my parents' house, the file folder tucked securely in my oversized purse. It felt heavier than a simple stack of papers. It felt like the weight of truth. I wasn't nervous. The anxiety and grief that had plagued me for weeks had been burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. I was an actress walking onto a stage for the final, pivotal scene. When I walked in, the scene was one of forced domestic bliss. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air. My father was watching football, my mother was bustling in the kitchen, and Chloe was artfully arranging hors d'oeuvres on a platter, probably for an Instagram story later. They all looked up as I entered, their smiles stiff and unnatural. "Clara, you came," my mother said, rushing over to give me an awkward hug. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice flat. Chloe approached me next, her face a mask of sorrowful contrition. "Clara, I'm so glad you're here," she said, her voice soft. "I've missed you so much. I hate what this has done to our family." I just looked at her, letting the silence stretch. I didn't offer a hug or a kind word. I just nodded and walked past her into the living room. Her perfect performance faltered for a second. I saw a flash of irritation in her eyes before it was gone. Dinner was excruciating. My parents tried to fill the silence with banal chatter about the weather and neighbors, pointedly avoiding the giant, gaping wound at the center of our family. I played my part, eating quietly and giving noncommittal answers. Chloe, meanwhile, was laying the groundwork for her next move, talking about the importance of forgiveness and how families need to stick together, no matter what. Finally, as my mother brought out the pumpkin pie, the moment I knew was coming arrived. My father cleared his throat and turned off the television. "Clara," he began, his tone serious and paternal, "we're all glad you're here. Your mother and I feel that this situation has gone on long enough. There's been a lot of hurt on all sides." I almost laughed. Hurt on all sides? "Your sister feels terrible about the accusation," my mother chimed in, looking at Chloe with sympathetic eyes. "And while what you did was deeply disappointing, we are your family, and we are willing to forgive you." There it was, the grand act of parental magnanimity. They were forgiving me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water. I placed the glass down gently. "Forgive me for what exactly?" My father's face hardened. "Don't play games, Clara, for stealing your grandmother's necklace, for lying about it, for putting this family through turmoil." Chloe reached across the table, trying to put her hand on mine. "It's okay, Dad," she said in a placating tone. "I forgive her. I just want my sister back." I pulled my hand away as if her touch were toxic. "That's very generous of you both," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "But there seems to be a misunderstanding. You see, I didn't steal the necklace. Chloe did." The air crackled. Chloe let out a scoffing, theatrical gasp. "Clara, stop it. Why are you still lying? We're trying to move on." "Oh, we're going to move on," I said. "We're going to move on to the truth." I reached into my purse and pulled out the file folder. I opened it and slid the first document across the polished dining room table. It was the quote from Aurelian Jewelry. "This," I announced, "is a quote for a high-quality replica of Grandma's necklace. It's made out to Chloe, and it's dated 4 months ago." My father picked it up, his brow furrowed in confusion. He read it, then looked at Chloe. "What is this?" "I don't know," Chloe stammered, her eyes wide. "She must have faked that. She's a graphic designer, she can fake anything." "A good theory," I conceded. "But a simple phone call to Arthur, the owner of the store, will confirm its authenticity. He remembers you quite well, Chloe, especially since you didn't just ask for a replica. You asked for a valuation of the original, didn't you?" The color drained from Chloe's face. My mother looked from me to her, a dawning horror on her face. "But that still doesn't prove anything," Chloe insisted, her voice rising. "Maybe I was curious. It's not a crime." "You're right," I said, and slid the second set of papers across the table. They were the printouts from the Gilded Collection website, showing the high-resolution photos of the necklace and the sold banner. Selling it is, though, especially when it's not yours to sell. My mother gasped, picking up the printout. That's Grandma's necklace, but how?" "Chloe sold it 3 months ago," I said, my voice like ice, "for $22,000. "You're insane," Chloe shrieked, finally dropping her victim act. "You have no proof of that. That could be any necklace." "It has the same unique flaw in the clasp that Grandma's did," I said calmly. "And as for proof," I slid the final paper across the table, the bank statement. I had used my design skills to highlight the specific line item. "Here is the wire transfer from the consignment store's parent company into your bank account, Chloe. $21,150 deposited 2 months ago. Would you like to explain that?" Silence. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the room. My father stared at the bank statement, his face ashen. He had seen these statements before, but he had never known what to look for. He had probably assumed it was a big brand deal. My mother looked at Chloe, her eyes filling with tears of a different kind now, not of disappointment in me, but of dawning, catastrophic betrayal by her favored child. Chloe looked trapped. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, an excuse, a lie big enough to cover this. But there wasn't one. The evidence was absolute. It was irrefutable. She finally crumbled. Her face contorted, and she let out a wrenching sob, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she wailed. "I was in debt. I didn't know what else to do. I was going to replace it with the replica. No one would have ever known." "But you couldn't resist twisting the knife, could you?" I said, my voice devoid of pity. "You couldn't just replace it. You had to frame me. You had to destroy me to make sure you got away with it." My parents were frozen, staring at their weeping, confessing daughter. The perfect portrait was shattered beyond repair, but there was one final secret left to reveal. "You know," I said, my voice softening slightly, "the saddest part is that you didn't even know what you had. The heirloom has a final secret of its own." I looked at my stunned parents. "Did Grandma ever tell you why that sapphire was so special? I found her old journals when I was clearing out her attic last year. The jeweler who made it for her was a young man she was in love with before she met Grandpa. He made it for her as a symbol of his love. She kept it all those years not because it was valuable, but because it was a memory of a choice she made, to choose a stable life with Grandpa over a passionate romance. She wanted it to be passed down as a reminder that sometimes the quiet, steady choice is the right one." I looked directly at Chloe. "You sold a symbol of quiet, steady love for a quick payday to fund a life of cheap glamour. You didn't just steal from this family, you stole its history. You stole its heart." The confrontation was over. There was nothing left to say. The truth, in all its ugly, brilliant clarity, was finally out in the open. The fallout from Thanksgiving was not a loud explosion, but a slow, silent collapse. Chloe's confession sucked all the air out of the room, leaving my parents breathless and adrift in the wreckage of their own making. There were no more accusations, no more forced apologies. There was only the ugly, undeniable truth laid bare on the dining room table amongst the remains of a festive meal. I didn't stay to watch the aftermath. I had done what I came to do. I calmly gathered my papers, put them back in my folder, and stood up. "Clara, wait," my father said, his voice raspy. He looked older, defeated. I am so sorry." My mother was still just staring at Chloe, tears streaming down her face, her expression one of utter bewilderment, as if she was seeing her daughter for the very first time. "I know you are," I said to my father, and my voice was not angry, just tired. "But sorry doesn't fix this. It's not a magic word." I walked out of the house without a backward glance, leaving them to their shattered portrait. I didn't feel the elation I had expected. I didn't feel a triumphant surge of victory. I just felt empty. And then, slowly, as I drove back to my quiet apartment, another feeling began to seep in: peace. The peace of a battle finally over. In the weeks that followed, my parents tried to reach out. There were pleading voicemails and long, rambling emails filled with self-flagellation and guilt. They offered to pay for therapy, to take me on a trip, to do anything to earn my forgiveness. They were desperate to glue the pieces of our family back together, to pretend the cracks weren't there. But I knew you couldn't unshatter a mirror. I agreed to meet them one last time in a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. They looked haggard. They told me Chloe had moved out. They had given her an ultimatum: get a real job, start paying back the $22,000 to a fund I would control, and enter therapy for her compulsive lying and narcissism. It was the first time in her life they had ever imposed real consequences, and she had apparently reacted with fury, accusing them of abandoning her before packing her bags. "We failed you, Clara," my mother said, her coffee untouched. "We were so blinded by her sparkle that we never truly saw your light. We took your strength for granted, and we punished you for it." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me, and it was a balm on a wound I hadn't even realized was still so raw. "You did," I said, and I didn't say it to be cruel, but because it was true. And I need time to figure out what our relationship looks like now. I can't go back to being the frame for Chloe's painting. That part of my life is over. I set my boundaries. No more last-minute demands on my time. No more assumed emotional labor. Our relationship, if it was to be rebuilt, would be rebuilt on new ground, on a foundation of mutual respect, not familial obligation. It would be slow, and it might never be what it once was, but it would be real. As for Chloe, I haven't spoken to her. I see through mutual acquaintances online that she's still curating her perfect life, though it seems a bit less glamorous now. She's selling weight loss teas and working with smaller, less reputable brands. The $22,000 has yet to be repaid, but my parents are garnishing a trust fund they had set aside for her to make the payments. I don't care about the money. I care about the principle. My own life has blossomed in the space that my family's drama used to occupy. My business loan was approved. I've hired a junior designer to help with my expanding client list. I'm busier and more creatively fulfilled than I have ever been. Mark and I have grown even closer. Our friendship is the kind of steady, reliable love my grandmother's necklace was always meant to represent.